Hi, and welcome to this Fuller Speed Ahead here at Live at Home or Virtual Summit. My name's Kevin Hill. I'm the executive publisher here at FreightWaves, standing in for Craig Fuller on this episode. And joining me is Larry Klein, Vice President of Logistics at Bring. And we're going to talk about the final mile. We're going to talk about how COVID's changed quite a bit in the logistics space and what's needed in the future. And Larry, thanks for joining me today.
Kevin, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, and Larry, you have 20 years of experience in logistics, in sales and operations with R.R. Donnelley, Echo, and a number of other places. What brought you to Bring?
Oh, that's a great question. I really was interested I could see what was happening in the final mile in terms of just the sheer amount of volume headed that way. This was well before COVID, but you could see the importance of it. You could see how much companies were focusing on it. I was actually helping run a final mile business at the time. And I could also see that a lot of the legacy technologies that had been launched, say in the last 10, 15, 20 years, were probably not built for what was coming. I had been introduced to Bring earlier in my career. I met their original founder at a conference, and long story short, reached out to them and really loved kind of where they positioned themselves and ourselves in the space. Of helping companies, both shippers and logistics organizations, really provide visibility and experience through the final mile that you really hadn't seen before in the marketplace. So that's what really attracted me to them. So I've been with Bring about 2.5 years.
So Larry, let's talk about the last year, 15 months, and the disruption that the logistics space and in retail, e-commerce, final mile, kind of all through the supply chain is seen quite a bit of disruption because of COVID, and generated some new trends. So that brings a lot of uncertainty to the area, to the market. To delivery of goods. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we saw, and again, across shippers and logistics providers, is just the struggle to scale, right? I think it's what's amazing to me is even if you look at the biggest of the big, right? You look at UPS, you look at FedEx or USPS or even Amazon, even those world-class companies had a tough time scaling for this unpredictable amount of volume. And like I said, not only are they world class, but they have unbelievable infrastructure. They're really good at what they do, right? So that's the best of the best. Now you kind of take the step down in terms of size and sophistication, and it was this double-edged sword of the opportunities were immense, right? So many logistics providers were being presented with growth opportunities they had never seen before, with either with their current customers or with new customers. And I think many of them came out of this understanding is that their business, both from a business process perspective and also from a tech perspective, were really not built or prepared to kind of handle that kind of volume efficiently, right? You can handle almost anything by throwing people at it. It's not overly sustainable. It's not overly profitable. But I think this really kind of showed where the industry was headed, and if they wanted to be players, and if they wanted to be able to accommodate this level of growth, they had to do a little rethinking of how they run their business and where they invest in terms of tech.
You talked about scale there, and that's a really interesting angle for everything. And you said you can just throw, oftentimes you can throw people at a problem. It's not the most efficient. When companies need to scale up in this way, what are some of the key criteria that they need to think about, especially when it comes to technology and the needs of both their vendors and their customers as well?
Yeah, and I'd probably I'd put a third category in there between vendors and customers, and I'd say they're employees, and maybe a fourth if their drivers are not employees, right? It's really um, the, what we saw was companies once they kind of took that initial punch, um, really trying to figure out, okay, where are we manual? Where are we really struggling? Um, is it processing orders? Is it visibility? Are we getting inundated in the call center? Are our drivers struggling because they're doing more than they ever have done before? Are our employees having a difficult time doing their job because they just don't have data and information at their fingertips in real time? And I think as you see the scale ramp up, what was a small problem in the past becomes a large issue, and people got frustrated. I mean, if your where are my order calls increase dramatically and you don't have access to that information, it becomes a very frustrating environment for employees to exist in. So that's what we saw, a ton of that. And then as a result of that, Kevin, it was, when people got a chance to take a breath, a lot of the conversations were, okay, how do we plan for a future that we don't really know what's in store, and how do we make sure that our tech and processes are flexible enough so that we don't have to necessarily know what's coming, but we know that we're prepared to be able to flex and be able to change and be able to pivot. And I think that was the big learning coming out of COVID, especially for logistics providers.
I think another key point on that, and you had the beginning of COVID, you had the beginning of this boom of e-commerce and final mile, where just the consumer expectations were just having it delivered at my doorstep. I think that's changed too over the course of the last year, and maybe I know it from firsthand experience, maybe not, but expectations certainly have changed. It's now you demand quick delivery, right? Since in the early days, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, we understand that everything is tight right now and emergency supplies have to go out. But now the expectations are a little bit higher, right? It's like I want it same day, I want it next day, I want it 2 days, I want it correctly, I want it like clockwork. And those expectations have grown as e-commerce sales have grown, right?
Yeah, I think the word you use repeatedly is the key word, which is want, right? And not everybody wants it in an hour or wants it next day, right? So tied to want is choice, right? So we're all consumers, right? We're all at home and we all get stuff delivered to our homes, and we have a level of expectation for experiences. Um, and I think some of that gets brought to the business place where we say, hey, this is what we need to offer because this is what I expect when I'm wearing my consumer hat versus my business hat. But so that's a great point, right? When we talked about flexibility and we talked about being prepared, nobody knows, and I'll use Amazon as an example. Nobody knows where Amazon is going to drive delivery, right? You can guess, and you could say it's not going to get slower, but you're not 100% sure like what the expectations are going to be in 6 months to a year to 2 years, right? The world is good; it's going to change, and pendulums can swing either way. Um, and so, again, back to being prepared, it's what if you have large opportunities as a logistics provider where your customer, which is the shipper, wants to offer 2-hour delivery. But what if they want you to aggregate and offer next day or 2 day at a reduced price point? Those are the kind of things strategically that logistics companies have to kind of sit down around the table as an executive team and say, listen, we have to be ready because we're not sure what our shippers are going to ask for. Um, they can ask for faster, they can ask for slower, they can ask for sustainable options, right? Green options. We're seeing a lot of that in the marketplace as well. We have to be prepared to be flexible, right? We have to be prepared to be able to say that's not okay. We can take a bunch of people and kind of create a separate business over here and just run it. We have to kind of meld that into our day-to-day operations, but do that at scale. And when you can do that, that's when you can actually run profitably and give your employees and drivers all the tools they need to be successful.
Yeah, and talk about tools to be successful. Larry, you guys have done a couple studies on this, and here's one of the key stats that I took away from that research is that in your survey, I believe 200 logistics service providers, over 60% of them saw increased demand for last mile delivery, but a lack of visibility, automation, and innovative tech was holding them back. And there's 3 or 4 different groups that we talked about, but you have the shippers, vendors, you have employees, and then drivers. If they're not employees, that makes it a tough day when you don't have those automative and technological processes, and you're stuck in manual, kind of a manual purgatory as demand is increasing and expectations are increasing as well.
Yeah, those studies were really fascinating, right? Because so we did what we call the Bring Barometer for retailers. So we in effect asked retailers kind of what was going on in their world, how COVID affected them, where their focus is strategically, what's important to them, and they're really the voice of let's just call it the consumer, right? That because those are their customers. And then we did a very similar survey for logistics service providers, where we not only asked what was important to them as a business, but also their customers, which are the retailers. And so there were some consistencies across the board, and then there were some inconsistencies that are probably some opportunities for logistics companies to address. And so one of the things we saw, like across the board, in terms of importance, is visibility, right? And you guys talk to a lot of visibility players in the marketplace. I think our definition of visibility is a little different. This is visibility into almost every aspect of the final mile, and it's some of the things we talked about a little bit earlier, right? So visibility is not only for the consumer to kind of have that Uber-like tracking and be able to understand what the ETA is and when their parcel or large, big and bulky item is going to be delivered to the home. So certainly that's the most common definition. But visibility is also, a dispatcher knowing where his or her drivers are, right? Visibility is also a driver really understanding what their day is like, because they are presented with information in real time at every stop so they can do their job more effectively, right? Visibility is customer service people really understanding when there are exceptions, when there are problems, because stuff happens. We all know that, right? And being ahead of that. So it's really this all-encompassing world of, hey, we know we're going to have challenges. Every day is different in logistics and transport, especially in final mile. But how do we present the data in real time to all the constituents, to everyone involved, so they can do their jobs and do it as effectively as possible? And so both. What was interesting was the retailers placed a really high level of value on visibility, because I think they look at that as being a differentiator as they compete against other retailers or other shippers. But the logistics service providers, while they said that they get asked about it a lot, weren't really planning on necessarily investing in it. So that's where you see one of those kind of aha, and this is not a Bring like commercial, but it's just, look, those are your customers, and they're telling you that this is important to them, and yet as a group, 200 logistics service providers, I think it was 18. I think I have the number here. 18% said they were going to invest. So it's not a very high number.
Yeah, so we were talking like 4 out of 5 LSPs, logistics service providers, aren't planning to invest in more visibility throughout the entire process. And you hit the nail right on the head. It's not all about where it is on the truck, on the road, but it is from the warehouse picking or the order execution to the warehouse picking, all the way through to the truck on the end. and what happens, if it's delayed at any part of that, what's the updated status? I mean, that's what consumers and their vendors, retailers, right, are claiming for. But you're saying 4 out of 5 LSPs aren't ready to make that investment.
Correct. Yeah, they're not ready to make that investment. So
What does that tell you about? Yeah, I mean, what does that? What do you infer from that?
I think it's a couple of things. I think there's as with anything else, it's education. It's also incumbent upon technology providers to really show the value and help logistics providers build the business case. Right. This isn't just about selling tech. It's about, well, what is, if you had this level of visibility, what do your employees get to do? How do you drive waste out of your? We talked about the manual processes before. These things are all tied together. It's really fascinating to do. We do a lot of workshops with our prospects and customers to truly dig in on, okay, if you were going to make this investment, let's work with you to figure out, what does it mean to your business? Because no one's buying tech just for the sake of buying tech, right? It's not, it's a painful, change management is hard. It's a painful process. Nobody likes to switch off one platform to another. So there has to be a compelling business reason to do it. What we see are like buckets. So you see a bucket of manual processes that really you can address. And then so that's more on the cost side. And then you see on the revenue side, if you had this capability, does it allow you to better compete against your other logistics providers that are all clamoring for this retail volume? And so we're able to kind of put a dollar value on those things and help companies justify the spend.
And it's always great to put dollar values on that, but just from a conceptual level on my side, I mean, that's a key differentiator. That's a key competitive advantage right now. You had a year of where it brought, you had kind of a trend brought forward, demand brought forward on e-commerce in the final mile. I mean, it's grown, explosive growth over the last year, and that rate of growth is going to continue. It brought forward the trend that we all did see coming, in the next 5 or 10 years pre-COVID, right? And now that is just accelerated, and LSPs who aren't ready to invest in that technology and accept those new rules of the game really are missing out on a real key differentiator, aren't they?
Agreed. I think from a competitive perspective, and obviously we're not involved in every conversation that an LSP would have with a shipper or with a retailer, but I know that the demands are very high. There's also a big demand from the retailers for self-scheduling. So to allow consumers, when they're placing an order, so at checkout or just after checkout, to leverage tools that allow them to pick, back to choice, right? We just chatted about choice, right? To let them pick. They may not want it today or tomorrow. They may want it next week, right? Maybe they're away. Maybe they're just not ready for it. So giving them the ability to choose what's convenient for them, but presenting real options on behalf of the logistics provider, right? It's not like you're giving them carte blanche to pick whatever delivery slot they want, because that doesn't work for anybody. But what you are presenting them with, because the technology exists, is to say, hey, you live in a certain area. I know where I'm going to be shipping this product from. Therefore, I have a general idea of the options that are available from an efficiency and an operational perspective, and I'm going to present those to you. Now, you as the consumer, you're like, great, I've got options. This is awesome. Like, you don't know that the 3 options you're being presented are all good for the LSP, but that's okay. That's kind of where the technology really helps it helps the retailer address the needs of the consumer. It helps the consumer schedule on something that's convenient for them, and it helps the LSP operate more efficiently. So those are the kinds of things that we work on together. Again, what we found is self-scheduling, big point of discussion for retailers, not as big for the LSPs. They're kind of struggling with how do they fit into that equation to help drive self-scheduling, so that it is a competitive. That's a huge competitive differentiator for a logistics provider, right?
Yeah, I would definitely think so. The self scheduling would be really a large key component. Just as you said, that is a key competitive differentiation. We've been talking about technology. Let's pivot back over to drivers and talk about trends in the driver world. And you pointed out a couple times, and if we can dive into this a little bit deeper. The difference between drivers, if they're employees or they're contractors. Where do you see the trends in the final mile between those two different classifications?
Yeah, the final mile is an interesting place for the driver community. So you do have employee drivers, you do have independent contractors, you have outsourced master contractors, you have outsourced agents, you have outsourced to crowdsourced organizations. So there's a pretty big mix of driver models in the logistics space. Most of the companies we talk to are running an IC model for the most part. Some are running their own employees, but most are running ICs. What we see is tech again can be a reason for a driver to stay or go. Right. One of the challenges of running an independent contractor model is, they're under no obligation to show up tomorrow. Right? If they get a better job, or they can drive for someone else, and they either find that it's a more pleasurable experience, or it's compensation based, or they like the work better. So you're competing consistently to attract and retain drivers, right? It's an everyday thing. And obviously we don't address all of the components that go into whether a driver does or doesn't want to drive for a logistics provider. But one of the things that we do is really have a focus on driver experience and what the driver does during the day, and how can we facilitate a driver being more efficient. The beautiful thing about the IC model is the more efficient you are as a driver, the more money you can make. Right. So technology really aligns with that very well. Right. If a driver typically can do, I'm just going to pick a number, 30 stops a day, and just by routing and optimization, just by presenting them with really good data at delivery, so they can get in and out of their stops faster. If they can do more stops per day in the same amount of time, that's money in their pocket, and therefore, as a result, they would be more inclined to stay working for that logistics provider. So that's where tech kind of supports that, and that visibility, that concept of visibility. I mean, imagine if you're a driver and you show up to a delivery and you have no idea what the requirements are, or you're not sure, or it's not updated, or something happened 2 minutes ago, a communication happened 2 minutes ago, and you weren't made aware of it. It's very frustrating, right? It's a very hard job. It's a very challenging job. So again, we have a ton of different communication tools that allow the dispatcher to communicate with the driver, the consumer to communicate with the driver. Really, we're trying to take friction out of the process, and as a result, hopefully you can retain more drivers for your company.
And you talked about friction right there. I mean, that's what really visibility brings, is to remove friction. Because the more you're kind of in control of your own workflow, you have the information you need to make decisions, whether you're an employee, a customer, a retailer, owner of an LSP, a driver, independent contractor. The more visibility you have, the better decisions you can make, which reduces stress, hardships, and those painful moments throughout your day.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've all waited for, and I'm not going to name names, and I'm not going to name industries, but we've all waited at home for something to come between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Right? Everyone has experienced that, right? That's a massive amount of friction, right? To give that wide of a window and then no further communication. creates an experience that's pretty negative, right? And I think a lot of companies have addressed that and have moved beyond that. But so one of the things our customers are trying to do is not only give more accurate ETAs, tighter ETAs, but then updated ETAs as the day unfolds, right? And then as a result of that, potentially the option to reschedule, right? So let's say you had to be home for a delivery, and let's say your original ETA was in the middle of the day, and then because there was traffic or someone got held up at a previous stop, now it's being pushed out, and now you're not going to be there. So today's world, the consumer can say, I want to reschedule this, and they can do it in an automated fashion. So the driver doesn't show up with something that can't be delivered. The consumer doesn't have to wait around not knowing when the driver's going to be there. Those are the things that we see, as to your point, as friction, that we're constantly kind of working on as an industry to try to take that out of the equation, because it really does make a difference in terms of the perception of the retailer and ultimately the perception of the logistics provider.
You're exactly right. And removing the friction increasing visibility, removes the friction, makes everybody happy, and that is a competitive advantage, and one that I think every LSP should chase after with all their might. Certainly, Larry, it's been a pleasure speaking with you on this Fuller Speed Ahead here at Live at Home. And any parting thoughts, or how can our audience reach out and learn more about Bring?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. No, it's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. Obviously, you can go online at www.bring.com. If anyone wants to shoot me a note, I'm at larry@bring.com, and happy to chat with anybody in the audience that has questions or wants to talk about the topics that we covered today. One last thing, Kevin, before we hop, I just because we didn't really touch on it, and it's kind of an exciting new offering for us, is that we're really looking to try to help both retailers and logistics providers better manage their sustainability efforts, and really try to not only their carbon footprint, but just offer choice, again, back to choice, offer choices potentially that are more green. So we launched a tech practice called Bring Green, and more to come on that. But we see it as a topic that a lot of retailers want to talk about, and as a result, a lot of logistics providers are being tasked with how can you become a partner in this. So I did want to throw that out to the audience because we didn't get a chance to chat about it, but it's another interesting kind of aspect of how the delivery world is changing.
Thanks for including that, Larry, because we didn't cover sustainability, and it is important, and it's growing more important every day. And there's such good technologies attacking it from every different angle here. So thanks again, Larry. Thanks to Bring, and thanks for watching this Fuller Speed Ahead. And stay tuned for some more amazing sessions here at FreightWaves Live at Home.